welcome to the 61st episode of Everyday Eternal. With me tonight are my two co-hosts, Wrenn and Eric. Fuck, I heard a sound and I got distracted. Let me redo that.
Eric, fuck.
I was like, did you forget Eric's name?
No, actually, you know what? We're actually going to run with this. Now I just have to close Facebook. Hey, guys.
You know, that's the kind of editing I like. It's like, fuck, yeah, let's roll with it. We'll do it live.
Guys, how's it going? How are you doing? Bob, let's start with you. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm really glad to have Eric Landon back on. I know it's been a while since we've assembled the trifecta, and we definitely went through some hurdles to get this to work, but I think we're going to have an amazing podcast for you guys. What have I been up to? I've been playing a good amount of Legacy, both online. I also just came back from SCG Philadelphia, where I played the Team Open. I played Slow Depths there. The team did not end up making day 2. I ended up going 7-2 personally, but I think there was one match I easily could have won, so I could have gone 8-1. And I played the Slow Depths deck, the version with Dark Confidants. And overall, I feel like even though we'll get more into this, but everybody's talking about Wrenn 6, and I found even though everybody had like Wrenn 6 Wasteland, I played against Wrenn 6 for literally the first 4 rounds of the tournament, and I went 3-1 against it. So I don't think that Wrenn 6 by itself is enough to beat Dark Depths, and we can talk about why a little bit later, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Let's get into that later. Eric, you've been streaming a lot. Have you also played a couple of tournaments lately, or are you fully committing to content creation right now?
I mean, I'm spending a lot of time doing content stuff, but I do plan to play Magic Fest and especially Legacy tournaments that come up. I was going to go to GP or Magic Fest Denver this past weekend, but surprisingly, the flights from Portland to Denver weren't as good as I expected them to be, so I decided to skip it since it was a standard tournament and the flights were pretty bad, and I just took the weekend off from Magic and did some non-Magic stuff with some non-Magic friends. I went camping.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that? I hear like the Pacific Northwest is pretty good for that.
Yeah, it was good. It was fun. And
while you were doing that, Reddit discovered that you had actually broken the metagame with your 12-post Mystic Forge Karn deck, as somebody posted on the subreddit. So you only learned about that later, that you had actually broken the metagame. So can you quickly tell us like how that went for you, that deck that you built there? Sure.
Yeah, that was interesting. I saw that this morning before my stream, and yeah, I broke Legacy. No, right before I went camping, the stream before I went camping, I spent like the whole day playing Urza Stompy decks with the new Urza Forge and the blue Urza, and those cards were like pretty cool in Stompy decks. I mean, I didn't have like crazy records or anything with them, but they seem to add quite a bit because they add a lot of like card advantage engines to Stompy decks that you usually just don't have. So I've been continually playing with those. And after a couple of leagues with the blue Urza Lord something or other.
High Artificer or something.
Yeah, that card and the Forge, Urza's
Mystic Forge.
I was like, well, maybe I'll just get rid of the blue and try some more dedicated Mystic Forge stuff and play 4 of those. So I started to put together a colorless deck that's like Cloud Post with Mystic Forge. And I kind of started to put it together on my stream on Friday, and then on Thursday, and before I went camping, I was waiting for my friends to come pick me up, and I ran a couple of leagues with it, and I went 3-2 and 2-3, so I went 5-5, which is pretty good.
Broken.
50%. Yeah, and then I posted one game on Twitter where I kind of discovered what Paradox Engine does, because when I was on stream, somebody said, put Paradox Engine in your sideboard. I was like, sure, I'll put that in my sideboard. And then one game I kind of stumbled upon what it actually does in the deck, and it literally lets you play your entire deck and cast massive ballistas and things like that. So that was pretty cool. I posted on Twitter, and then I went camping, and I came back, and today I noticed that there was a Reddit thread that said I had broken Legacy, and I was hiding my tech from everybody, and I wasn't streaming.
So you went into the woods, into the wildlife to hide from people that were trying to steal your list because you needed to keep it secret for the next, I don't even know, Magic Fest or something.
Yeah.
That's how it works, right?
Exactly.
I guess we can talk a little bit about that deck later that has you were allegedly, as the post says, murdering people with. For a couple other things that have been going on in Magic, I think we have a lot of tournament results from the last weekend especially. The first one I want to get to is the Eternal Fest Legacy Championship in, I apologize in advance, Guangzhou in China. It had, I think, 104 players with even some international representation, and the top 8 featured one Eldrazi aggro deck, one Hogaak depth deck, one burn deck, two blue-red Delver decks, two black-red Reanimator decks, and a Lance deck. And one of the blue-red Delver decks actually ended up taking down the finals over the Eldrazi aggro deck. And that's just something that I want to point the attention of the community, or at least, let's say, the Western community to, because there's a lot of legacy going on in China, and they are really consuming a lot of also the Western articles. And I know that they have articles translated, sometimes even podcasts. So they put in a lot of work, and I would really like to see the communities getting even closer and together, because I know that the Chinese are watching and reading a lot of our content, and it would be cool to also show them more representation. And I almost want to say Western media, but I guess we're just like a little podcast, but we are one of many, and that's what I want to do. And I also want to highlight that in December, there's going to be another one of those tournaments. They usually alternate between southern China, so this one was in Guangzhou, and Beijing in the north. And I went, like most of you know, I was invited and went to the one in Beijing last December, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to go again this year. Actually, this is where Eric and I first met, right?
Yeah, that is. Yeah, it was about last December.
Are you going to go again? Or I guess now that you're based in the US, it's not that easy anymore.
Yeah, no, it just worked out really well for my vacation at the time. And it wasn't, the flights were pretty good from Thailand. But this year, I don't think I'll be going because it's like a 30-hour flight.
Okay, that's pretty wild. Another tournament that was going on the same weekend, hey, who's at Legacy was that? Like, we're seeing all these tournaments. Is the Leaving a Legacy Open in somewhere in New England? Oh, damn.
Acton, Mass.
Oh, yeah, that counts as New England, right?
Yes, that's actually where I grew up, so I know it very well.
Oh, nice place.
Yeah, it was my hometown. They didn't have a Magic store until after I left. But then in college, they opened a game store in Acton, and then I've been back when I visited home. I was like, oh, this would have been nice to have. But yeah, it was cool.
Cool. So yeah, the Leaving a Legacy Open, brought to you by the Leaving a Legacy podcast. And they had, despite there were other tournaments going on in the similar area, I think Philadelphia, that we will talk about later on, still a decent representation of, I think, almost 100 people showed up for it. And the finals were actually taken down by a deck nobody would have probably predicted to do that. Back then, we would have called it Big Sue. Now it's like punishing Big Sue. It's a deck that plays 4 Wild Nacatl, 4 Tarmogoyf. I mean, even 4 Tarmogoyf is like quite rare these days. 4 Noble Hierarch, 4 Knight of the Reliquary, and then just 12 removal spells. 4 Swords, 4 Bolt, 4 Punishing Fire, and 2 Sylvan Libraries, together with a couple of Silver Bolts and Green Sun Sonnet. So this is pretty straightforward. Remove your guys, hit your face, and it actually ended up taking down the event. How do you feel about that deck, guys? Is Sue something that's coming back, or is this just like a one-hit wonder?
I'm going to call it a one-hit wonder. I don't even know. This deck is very pretty. It's all Japanese. It's done very nice, but I'm at a complete loss. I'm struggling to see what decks Zoo is good against. I think it's probably ahead against Delver, and I don't even know if it beats Control. I definitely don't think it beats Combo. And even against Chalice decks, I mean, I guess maybe you're okay against Chalice decks, but this deck is playing 4 Plows, 4 Nobles, 4 Bolts, 4 Wild Nacatls. It's probably fine against Chalice decks, but I wouldn't be super excited to play it against Chalice decks. I don't know. It's just crazy to me that someone's playing Zoo and winning.
Eric, what do you see when you look at the deck of, by the way, let's give a shout out to Merit El Murazi, the pilot of the deck, who ended up taking down the event. Eric, what do you see? Do you just straight skip to the 3 surgical extractions and feel like, oh, that's not enough?
I did look at that. I would guess it's, not necessarily a fluke, but I bet it's not something that could be run back over and over again to win 100-person tournaments. It looks kind of like what Bob's said, but you're playing a deck with creatures and creature removal. There's so many things in Legacy that just don't care about that stuff, so I'm a little surprised that it was able to take it down, but I would play it on stream.
You would?
You would go 5-5 and break it.
Yeah.
Once again.
5-5 Legacy's broken.
I was actually wondering whether Sue was viable or more like a month ago. I actually started putting it together, but a much more aggressive variant that had step links and wouldn't play any of the 3-drops, because I felt like maybe while Nacatl being a 3/3 can actually get past most of the stuff that's going on in the format. But then I was reminded that Baleful Strix is still a card, so I don't know. I wonder whether you really want to play the Punishing Fire engine in there or just go for straight up Red and 6. But at that point, you're really starting to look like a worse version of 4-color Loam, I guess. So, I don't know. The deck also interests me. I kind of want to play it just to see how it actually ends up performing. I'm not fully convinced, but I'm very open to being wrong, because Su being in the metagame is always something that I would be happy about. It hasn't really been a deck ever since 2011, pretty much. So it's been gone for a while. By the way, super interesting final. They played the first game. Merit on Su ended up winning the first game against 4-color Delver. And then while sideboarding, they discovered that his opponent had a decklist error, which nobody noticed until the finals. So as the final game of the tournament, his opponent received a game loss, and the tournament would have ended, but they decided, okay, officially I have won, but let's still play the other two games for the sake of it. So a lot of people, including me, tuned into the stream, and they saw Merit on Punishing Su actually lose those second two games and feel like, okay, so 4-color Delver has won the event. And then afterwards there was a lot of confusion with people who felt like, hey, what, did he like scoop the finals or what happened? So no. In case you came here and you were wondering how did Su win after losing two games, this is how it goes.
Okay, so Zu technically didn't even beat Delver, which was like the one deck I pointed to being like, hey, that's probably a fine matchup for Zu.
It's really kind of hard to see what this would be good against.
Maverick, maybe?
Yeah, but Maverick used to slaughter Su. I mean, having Punishing Fire definitely helps it out.
I don't know.
I guess after sideboarding, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hate bears for Storm, but even that's not great considering that you're not doing anything else really. Jesus, I don't know.
This will just be like, we'll put it down as a question mark. Maybe people will play it some more and realize it's bad. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I just don't see it. Like to Eric's point, a lot of your cards have blank text boxes. That's not where you want to be.
Still, I heard that we're going to see Eric play the deck in the near future. At least it sounded like.
I said I would be. I might try to see
don't
if how
say that,
wrong
because
I
now
am,
like
but
the Zoo contingent is going to come hound you until you do that. So
yeah, I'm definitely going to be there and going to be like, Eric, when's Su Day? Let's take him to the Su. We want to see Su. If you ever put up like a Twitter poll or something, hey, what should I play tonight? Everybody's going to be like Su. In before my viewers asked me to play Su, but I actually would like to play Su. It's a pretty straightforward deck to play. But anyway, in speaking of pretty straightforward decks to play, no, seriously, Bob, you played Slow Depth at SCG Philadelphia. Who did you team with, by the way?
I teamed with Collins Mullen, who played Bant midrange, and Lee McLeod, who played the Urza deck in Modern. And boy, was that deck really, really fun to spectate and watch. It was kind of wild and crazy, and I think I'm excited to see if people played at the Mythic Championship coming up next weekend or this weekend. I'm excited to see like what pros come up with, because it's like, I think if you build that deck properly, it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, I hear that even before the banning of Bridge, it was already considered favored against all the Hogaak dredge decks in Modern. So I think that can only have gotten even better now that the combo is not there anymore with the Altar.
Yeah, the Hogaak deck lost its free I win button, so I think Urza should be fine against that deck. It's just like, it's one of those, artifact decks where you have like War of Invention, so you're kind of just ahead against any deck that's like weak to your tutor targets like Grafdigger's Cage and Spellbomb.
So overall, you didn't get the necessary record to make day 2, or did you actually make day 2 and just not get there in the end?
No, so you needed a 7-2 record to make day 2. And as I said earlier, I personally went 7-2. Could have gone 8-1 if I played a little bit tighter, but team didn't make day 2. But still, it was a really fun event, and I had a good time.
Would you play the same list again? We're definitely going to post in the show notes, because I know you've been working on that deck for quite a while now, actually, right?
Yeah, honestly, I wish I had more time to prepare, but I only played a couple leagues with the deck after Dave Long, the Depth Master, messaged me and was like, hey, this deck is still good. And I had tried 4-color Delver, which, by the way, it won the event, but it did not do well in general. I think there was maybe only one copy in day 2. The breakout deck of the tournament was definitely the 4-color Snowpile, which I felt was pretty ahead against 4-color Delver, and just a much better constructed deck in my opinion. 4-color Delver, I tried it. I found it extremely clunky, and if you didn't draw Wrenn in 6, you lost so easily to Wasteland. You couldn't cast your spells half the time. I have absolutely zero interest in ever playing that deck again, even though it did take down the event, but, someone's got to get lucky, I guess.
Yeah, mana bases in Legacy are super dependent on Wrenn in 6 right now, right?
Yes, and I do want to talk a little bit about that. I think Wrenn in 6 makes the most sense in a control deck, because a control deck leverages the land drop so much better than Delver does. In Delver, you can do like a couple cool things. Like if you get the Wrenn ultimate off, you can like use Daze. You can just literally sacrifice an island to cast Daze because you return an island and then discard it to the retrace, which is kind of cool. But like overall, Delver just does not use the extra lands well, and you basically just have a bunch of blanks in your hand. Whereas Control, I know my friend Rugvet has recently been adding Lonely Sandbars. And then with that, you actually literally just generate a card every time you tick up with Wrenn and 6. So Control just leverages the land drops and the cards much better than Delver does. So I expect to see a lot more of this 4-color snow deck, and I think it was the deck of the tournament. I expect to see a lot of it going forward because, people love playing like the Czech pile style decks. And I guess we should go into a little bit what this deck is about, because a lot of our listeners might not, keep up with Legacy as closely as we do. But the breakout deck of the tournament was built by Daryl Ayers. We had talked about it a good amount, but it's basically the classic Czech pile colors, but you get to play some basic lands and Arkham's Astrolabe, which is a 1-mana snow artifact. You pay a snow mana, and then it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and then you start filtering all your mana. So what this lets you do is basically build like a pristine mana base that's like very good against Wasteland while casting all the powerful spells. So Abrupt Decay, Kolaghan's Command, Leovold, Narset, like Brainstorm, Snapcaster Mage, all the removal spells, Plague Engineer. It's just like this huge, silly value engine. And I think this deck is very well built to beat up on the fair decks like Delver, Death and Taxes. And with Plague Engineer main, I see some people playing like it has a good shot against decks like Elves too, which were traditionally reasonable against these slow blue decks. So that's kind of my spiel on 4-color snow. What do you guys think of this deck?
Like you mentioned, it's the breakout deck of the tournament. I feel a little bit betrayed. I initially called it 4-color Astro Czech, but I guess your snow control makes a lot more sense. It put 3 copies in the top 8 in the hands of Daryl Ayers, Lucas Cruz, and Harlan Fryer. So we already saw it put up a lot of numbers on Magic Online and terrorize people with its snow mana base, which is pretty untouchable almost. I mean, there's definitely going to be games where Wasteland is going to hurt you, or even Blood Moon. But considering that Arkham's Astrolabe is not only castable, but also like completely works still under Blood Moon, the deck is quite resilient to mana disruption with Wrenn and 6 in the mix as well. So to me, that's the kind of Magic or the kind of deck I hate, where colors stop mattering all that much anymore, and you really just get to play all the good stuff, which usually is like 4 colors without white, because white doesn't really offer all that much good stuff or more specific good stuff. But this is definitely a deck that will be one of the top decks to beat in the Legacy to come. At least that's how I see it. Eric, how do you feel about that deck?
I'm not at all surprised that it was heavily represented in the top 8. Although I am still pretty skeptical about Arkham's Astrolabe. I think that Wrenn and 6 kind of fixes your mana and makes Wasteland not good, and it's pretty easy to play. If your 2-mana thing does that, you can just use your fetch lands to make it so that you can get to your second land drop usually. And I think that's like Astrolabe is 4 cards and 3 basics. I'm skeptical. I haven't done it. I haven't played it. I'm just very skeptical of Astrolabe in Legacy as being necessary way to fix your mana when you can use fetch lands and duels and...
Well, the reason Astrolabe is good is because it turns your basics into dual lands so that you don't get wastelanded, basically.
Yes, I understand that. But if you get wastelanded when you have Wrenn and 6 in play, the Wrenn that your opponent just wasted themselves as well. I mean, you just get the land back.
Fair.
So I just think Wrenn and 6 is good enough against wasteland that you can run 4 colors and not really care about wasteland. As long as you're able to set up your Wrenn and 6. If that's the card that's most important, then you need to set it up. But so I'm just, like I said, I'm just skeptical of it. I haven't tried it. I just feel like it's 4 cards that are probably not necessary. And the last thing I was going to say is if it's good against Blood Moon because you might be able to cast some spells, but you might not be able to cast any spells either because you're playing 3 basics. You get a basic, you get an Arkham's Astrolabe. That means you can make probably 2 colors for the rest of the game. And that's a good chance that that's not good enough. So Blood Moon's still going to be... It's not like it completely negates Blood Moon because you have these 3 basics and 4 Arkham's Astrolabes in your deck, and think that they're kind of just like not that good against a lot of other decks. So I don't know. I haven't tried it. I'll try it. I could be wrong.
Fair.
It's just... I hope that we won't see this kind of Magic. And I'm heavily biased against this kind of deck. If you know, I hated that Czech pile was a thing. But I gotta admit that the numbers it has been putting up as of late are really, really good. And I'm with Eric when it comes to Astrolabe. I always wonder whether that card is really necessary. It's still gonna take a little bit of work for me to fully buy into the card, even though a lot of people are like, oh my god, I have a basic island, a fetchland, and an Astrolabe. I can cast every single card in my deck. I don't know.
I mean, I think maybe you only need Wrenn and 6, but it's more like, you don't always draw Wrenn and 6 every game, so it's kind of like you have, 7 to 8 ways to fix your mana rather than just 3 or 4. I've been very impressed with the card when I tried it, so I guess you guys, have to try it for yourselves. Question for you, Julian. So I agree wholeheartedly with you that I hate a Czech pile. I hate everything these kinds of decks stand for. They just they sit there, they answer all your spells, they 2-for-1 you eventually until you have nothing left. It's very boring way to play Magic, in my opinion at least. And I don't find it super exciting. But there was a 5-color snow deck. Speaking of what white adds, there was a 5-color snow deck that went 5-2 in the Legacy Challenge online by Lucky Dragon, and he was playing white for some good ones.
Headshot. Oops, sorry. Did you hear that?
We can pretend that was just my my background, but.
I forgot to turn those off. Anyway, Lucky Dragon. I just googled for the list. I've got it in front of me. Right, keep going, man.
so this is a 5-color snow deck. It's playing 4 Wrenn and 6, 4 Astrolapes, 4 Prismatic Vista, and 1 of each snow basic land. How can you not love this list? This list, it plays white for. Let's hear it. Okay, so Source of Plowshares. Okay, that's actually the biggest reason to play white, but he only plays 2 of them because you only need 2 anyways. Then you got Teferi Time Raveler, so okay, not that spicy. But then he has Atraxa, Praetor's Voice, which is the every color except for red, 4/4 Angel Horror with all the keywords. Proliferate, Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink.
And Legendary.
And Legendary, sure, why not? I just think, Proliferate works really well with your Planeswalkers, right? I just think this deck is awesome, and I think everybody should stop playing the 4-color snow decks and play the 5-color snow decks, because they're way cooler.
This is hilarious, especially if you had ever told me that we would see a 5-color deck in Legacy that plays 5 basic lands. I'd be like, how? But this mana base is almost like a commander mana base if you look at it.
It's like one of every dual land. Oh my god, yeah, it's so funny.
I wonder whether they're playing the mountain just for the memes. Oh my god, this list. We're definitely going to link it in the show notes. And it also has another, it's not even a new arrival to Legacy really, but a card that I've seen a lot more of lately, Ayer Dream Render, which is Planeswalker, 1 colorless, and then 2, how would you call it, Dimir mana, so hybrid mana, blue-black. And what it does is it has 5 loyalty. Spells and abilities your opponent's control can't cause their controller to search their library, which is fucking annoying if you're playing elves and you can neither Senate nor end of turn fetch Dried Arbor nor Natural Order. So the card has more impact than I initially thought it would have. And it can also minus and mill the opponent for 4 cards and remove their graveyard. And by the way, just yesterday, I got actually milled by, I think it was Miracles playing this card against me. And yeah, usually I'm the guy milling Miracles or decking out Miracles. But yeah, it just lost the decking because of that stupid Ashiok card.
It's harder to deck the Green Sun Zenith deck, but yeah, I guess with Ashiok, it also exiles their graveyard. You can also target yourself, but you always exile your opponent's graveyard. Yeah, what do you guys think of this card? Because I have been seeing it in some weird lists. I saw this Bombardment list that just played Ashiok main, and I was just like, why would you play it main? Obviously, it's very good against tutors, as you mentioned, so it's good against Storm. It's good against graveyard decks. It stops fetch lands, I guess, but I don't really understand why people are playing this card.
Yeah, it doesn't really do much, especially not in the main deck, does it? It feels like a cute thing that you can cast for 3 mana that's going to interact with some important aspects of your opponent's deck. So that's why I can see it in the sideboard, but I think people were also glorifying it in POX because you can destroy all the lands and land Ashiok and then they can never fetch land again. But that's very deep into the danger of cool things for me.
Okay, yeah, I guess I have seen it in POX too. So yeah, that's at least it's still POX. I don't know.
I believe in that card in a POX deck. I've played some POX decks on my stream, and they've been actually really good, way better than I expected. And Ashiok, as a 2 of in them, was pretty good. I mean, you're playing Dark Ritual, at least I was in the list I was playing. And if you can play it on turn 1, and you're playing Smallpox and Wasteland and stuff like that, it's very hard for most decks in Legacy to actually do anything whatsoever. However, in a sideboard of Miracles, this card coming down on turn 3, it's way too slow for that effect.
Yeah, that's the same thing I'm feeling about the card. So it's probably more like a cute thing to do. And if you wanted to have a 3-mana walker for a control mirror, I guess you'd go with maybe even Baby Chase or Teferi or something like that. Or, of course, Nasset. Well, Nasset is already in the main for this list, at least. But yeah, so to get back to Bob's original question, this is a deck that I can respect. Because this is a deck that's pushed to the next level, and it's almost like it's a deck that's able to laugh about itself. It's actually playing 5 colors and 5 snow basics. I can respect that. They're also playing that at Traxa, so I'm not really sure why you would want to play that at Traxa. Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink. I guess that's nice, but it lacks First Strike. If it has Death Touch, it needs First Strike. Otherwise, it's gonna just die to Strix or Ice Fang Kodal, I guess.
It's like good in the mirror, but then they just go like fetch land, fatal push.
Yeah, the proliferate thing is like really cute when you can grow your planeswalkers, but if you have a planeswalker and you're attacking with your 4-drop, that's already a pretty good position that most other 4-drops would excel in as well. So not fully sold on the 4-mana legendary flyer. That doesn't really do all that much, even though it has so many keywords. But maybe it's the next thing to come. I don't know. I really think it's just a thing where you show off how many different colors of mana you can produce. You're like, hey, I got all these 4 different colors of mana. Let's just cast. The craziest thing we can find for that.
Yeah, it looks insane to me. But yeah, getting a little bit more back on topic. So the 4-color snow deck is basically, the new deck of the past 2 weeks. I believe it is the best Wrenn 6 deck I have seen thus far, although I do have a friend, Matt Soleil, who's been telling me that he's been crushing it with Sylvan Plug, which is a Wrenn 6 deck that's a Chalice deck. But for most people would say this 4-color snow deck is the best Wrenn 6 deck that has been built so far. And I would agree with that. How do you guys think we should start attacking this deck if it becomes like, the new, like, I don't know about if it'll ever become as good as Czech Pile was, but, like the new de facto, like, blue mid-range control deck? How do we start beating it?
So something I tried when people started doing this thing was to go all in on all-in combo, on super fast combo, which kind of worked to a degree, but also not really super satisfying, especially not to a degree where I felt like, oh my god, we are really hitting these deck hard, and it's gonna suffer from what we're doing. So, it's so tough. I guess one way, especially while most of them are running Wasteland, right? One way would be to go over the top to play some kind of 12-post deck, because those decks don't really care about Plague Engineer, Wrenn 6, only if they find Wasteland. So if you can stop that, maybe that helps. That's one way I could see it happening. The other thing, of course, that you can always try is to construct some kind of Blood Moon-esque deck. Even though that, like we talked about, that can also sometimes backfire, especially if you're on the draw. It's not going to be exciting, and then they have a lot of ways to deal with your quote-unquote threats that are sometimes not even all that threatening, especially if they're one of those goblins that just don't really do much once you get Plague Engineer on the board.
Yeah, and you're playing Abrupt Decay and Kolaghan's Command as well to get rid of things like Chalices and Blood Moons.
Yeah, so basically this is the dilemma that I've been facing with Elves as well. Like you mentioned, Elves is usually a deck that's quite strong against blue mid-rangey decks because you just grind them out. But back then, when we used to do that kind of stuff, people didn't have Plague Engineers. I mean, they had Leowolds, but that was something we could at least beat by just attacking them for a ton by casting Krato for natural ordering. But Plague Engineer is such a beating. I honestly don't know what we are supposed to do, but I get a feeling that maybe going over the top or having a super resilient combo could also do the thing. Because if you look at the main deck, if you're playing combo, which cards do you actually care about? They got 4 Force of Will and 2 Thoughtseize. So unless you're playing like a creature-based combo, or then there's not really much they're going to interact with.
Yeah, I agree for the most part. I think it looks to me like these lists are lacking in things that Czech Pile and other previously built blue-black based control decks usually had to make things like Reanimator make this a difficult matchup for Reanimator. Things like Narset and Leovold in the main. This doesn't have any of that, and it doesn't have Gurmag Angler. It doesn't have any of the inevitability that you would want after casting 2 counter spells, and it's got a lot of dead cards. So I think something like Reanimator or Dredge would be pretty good at fighting against the way that they are currently built.
So I guess we might be talking about a couple different decks. I guess the main deck we want to refer to is probably Daryl's deck.
That's what I'm looking at. I don't see any Leovolds or Narset.
Yeah, so you are correct. There are 2 Leovolds that he played the main for a while. He also tried Narset. He ended up moving all of that to the sideboard. So I think his deck specifically, you want to attack it by playing perhaps a combo deck that he doesn't have as many interactive spells against. Like he only has 2 Thoughtseize, 4 Force in the main, another Force and a Force of Negation in the sideboard. So I do think combo is the correct answer in terms of what to attack here, because as we established, it's very hard to attack the mana base. It's like if you're playing a creature deck, especially if you're playing a creature deck that's a tribal deck or has a lot of X1s, you're just automatically behind. So you want to avoid those kinds of strategies, and you basically want to play like more hard combo decks that like require this 4-color control deck to draw one of its like interactive spells early. So I definitely agree. I think combo is the best way to attack it. That being said, it can basically build itself to beat many of the combo decks. Like Dave Long, amazing depth player, he did lose his win-in against Alex Rubin, who was playing not this deck, but a very similar 4-color control deck that Strifo built. So Dave Long lost to like the 4-color control when they drew their Liliana's Triumphs, and they still had Wrenn 6 and Wasteland. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this kind of deck can beat most combo decks. Like I think it can build itself to be ahead against Storm, ahead against Sneak and Show, ahead against Dark Depths, maybe even ahead against like a deck like Dredge. But it can't do it all at once. You just run out of sideboard space eventually. So it really depends on like what it's trying to beat. But it's generally just like game 1's going to be soft against combo, and then game 2, did you bring the right sideboard cards, kind of deal.
Yeah, I agree, because this is actually the core of this is like the biggest nightmare of blue decks for Reanimator. If there were like 3 or 4 different cards different than the Daryl Ayers build that I'm looking at.
Yeah, the deck is highly customizable. I wonder if they're playing a list like that, how does Miracles actually fare against that? Miracles doesn't also care against about too many of those cards, but it also can't really win the game very well against them. I guess I almost feel like I want to get to a Miracles list that starts using Entreat the Angels again, if you can survive until that, because that deck doesn't really do much after that. But there's just so much value in this deck that's going to be tough to actually set that up.
I agree. I think a Miracles build with accumulated knowledge and Entreat the Angels to go just way over the top could have a good chance against this deck. Traditionally, Miracles, that's kind of how it beat those Czech pile decks. So I think there's some potential there. Also, these decks are not playing Hymn to Turok, which was another way they had to beat Miracles. So, I don't know. I'm like pretty... Like, I think Miracles could be built to beat this deck as well.
So how do you feel when you're playing, for example, your slow depth version? You already mentioned that you did pretty well against the Wrenn 6 decks. Do you think it's also generally well positioned? So not just your tournament that you did well in, but as a general choice for the metagame?
Yeah, I think Dark Depths, I'm very happy with it. I'm very likely to play a Dark Depths deck for the Grand Prix. The deck I've been experimenting with is Hogaak Depths. You mentioned that it did well in the Eternal event in China. It's been doing well on Magic Online. So far, I'm like 8-1 with the deck. I'm 4-0 in a league. Hopefully I'll get that 5-0. But my friend Carrie, he said he's 18-2, so I think that deck is also for real. We can talk about that a little bit. But overall, let me just talk a little bit about Dark Depths against Wrenn 6 specifically, because I think it's pretty interesting. So on its face, it's like, okay, why would you want to play Dark Depths against a deck that can recur Wastelands? But I think that's not the full story. I think you just have so many ways as Dark Depths to interact with Wrenn 6 that, yes, if Wrenn 6 Wasteland is unanswered, it will eventually beat you. But what do you have? You have turn 1 discard, you have Vampire Hexmage to kill Wrenn 6, you have Crop Rotation or Sylvan Scrying for Bajuka Bog to exile their graveyard so that they can't, Wasteland loop you, and you don't really care if they just have a bunch of non-Wasteland lands. Basically, I've already listed a bunch of ways that you can kind of interact with Wrenn 6. You can even attack Wrenn 6, depending on your depths build. So, for example, I was playing Hogaak Depths and I had Elvish Reclaimer and I just attacked and killed it. There are a lot of different ways to interact with it. It does mean that Dark Confidant is a no-no. Whenever I played against Wrenn 6 for my first 4 rounds, I just sided them out every single round. So it does possibly mean that Slow Depths might not be the optimal build for it, but something like Turbo Depth that also gets to play Pithing Needle, maybe that's a better build that would be good against these Wrenn 6 decks. So I think Dark Depths has a ton of play against Wrenn 6. It is a card that does interact with you, whereas before Control might have played another card that you didn't really care about. So it has gotten a little bit harder, I would say, but I don't feel threatened by these Control decks with Dark Depths until they start doing stuff playing 3 Edicts and more hate cards for Dark Depths, basically.
Yeah, that sounds fair. I know that James Hsu from both Beijing and Canada has also been playing that deck in the event, and I think he went X and 3, but he also said he threw away a game, so he also really enjoyed that list. I think he's been rocking a list very similar to the one you're putting forward recently. But also talking about reclamation Hogaak depth. I don't know whether we have actually established a proper name for it yet.
I'll just call it Hogaak depths, yeah, or Hog depth.
Hog depth, I like that. The list that everybody has been playing thus far lately is the one by DNSolver on Magic Online, who has put that up, that sweet 61 card main deck. I don't know where he got that from, but I've been loving that list. I picked it up, I streamed it. I think I also started out 4-0, then I ended up not winning the fifth game, but I've also been playing it off stream for quite a bit, and the deck is really, really strong. I barely ever win casting Hogaak. I'm not even sure. I think I played it through 3 or 4 leagues, and I maybe have won like 2 or 3 games with Hogaak. But it's a really nice backup plan, because sometimes the opponent has to commit a significant amount of resources to actually stop that plan. So I thought these them, and I see like all this graveyard hate, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, dudes, just take the 2020 to the face. And like you mentioned, Elfish Reclaimer is also like a serious card. It's a 1-mana threat, in the way that it either tutors for the combo or also puts a lot of pressure on planeswalkers when it turns into a 3-4. So that's definitely not to be underestimated. That's a very real card. I'm still not 100% sure that you want to play the Hogaak package, or at least not the 4 Hogaaks. I don't know, because I feel like maybe we can put something else in there that's gonna make our plan A even better.
I have an idea, and I have actually done it. You just cut a Hogaak. The deck only needs 3 Hogaaks. It's got a 61 card deck.
As well.
Oh man,
I got a Hogaak and I've been playing it, and 3 Hogaaks is plenty. And I would say I've won about half the games I've played with Hogaak, with the 3 of them.
I feel I'm late to the party. Has everybody been cutting the 4th Hogaak?
Not necessarily. I mean, in the challenge yesterday, 2 people went 5, or DNSolver top 8'd again, I think. And then another player playing his exact 75 went 5-2. I think this deck, I looked at it, and my first impression was like, well, I don't really see what this deck does that the turbo depths or slow depths does. Basically didn't see a reason to play the deck. But now that I've actually played the deck and thought about it some more, the reason to play this deck is you are just so much better against the blue decks game 1. Like, the blue decks just can't really interact with your graveyard, Stitcher Supplier, Cabal Therapy, like nonsense. And then post-board, they're forced to bring in all these graveyard hate spells. And Hogaak, like you said, is a much easier angle to interact with. Like, every blue deck has Surgical, basically. And so they spend so many cards interacting with your Hogaaks that you end up just like ignoring those cards completely and then just winning with depths, is what I've been finding post-board. But game 1, the graveyard angle is extremely potent. And so overall, I would say Hogaak depths compared to regular depths, it seems much stronger against the blue decks. It cares very little, or cares a lot less about Wasteland. It might be slightly weaker against the Chalice decks just because you play more 1s, but I think the other depths decks were so ahead against the Chalice decks that you're still going to be ahead against them. And then you are much worse against Death and Taxes, however, because you don't have like the Dark Confidants and Sylvan Safekeepers to play through their cards. Everything you do just kind of plays into Caracas and Swords to Plowshares. But luckily, Wrenn 6 has kind of really pushed out Death and Taxes from the format, so it's a deck that most Death and Taxes players are very, like, honestly, they're like hesitant to play it right now. After we talk about this, I do want to talk a little bit about Wrenn 6. I know Rodrigo was posting on Twitter saying, like, hey, maybe this card should be potentially banned down the line for the same reason Death Raid was banned, because it just, like, homogenized too many decks. But let's talk a little bit more about this Hogaak deck, and then let's move on to that topic.
Sure.
Yeah, so what do you guys, do you guys have any other impressions of like, is this Hogaak deck for real? Hogaak depths?
You know what I like? You mentioned that it can be somewhat weak to Chalice, and that's something that came up on one of the leagues I streamed, and chat came to the rescue, because you can actually disable the Chalice by using your Vampire Hexmage, which I almost totally missed, and chat was like, hey, you know what, just use the Hexmage on the Chalice and get end of turn Dark Depth and kill them. I'm like, whoa, this deck.
Yeah, that's like one reason among many that Dark Depths is favored against Chalice. The other reason is you just play lands and then like you win the game. And you have Abrupt Decay in your sideboard as well.
Eric, you have also streamed the deck you mentioned?
I started streaming it today. I've played a couple leagues with it. I think it's pretty good. My first impressions of it were that it looked not good. But then I saw DNSolver playing it on his stream, and he was crushing it. He said the Hogaak package was unnecessary. But in my experience, the Hogaak seemed to add something. I'm not sure if it's necessary in the long run. I think, as I might have said here before, but I have said in the past that I think mashup decks generally perform very well early on, and then the mashup just hurts them later on once people realize what's going on and they figure out how they're actually supposed to sideboard against it and things like that. So I'm curious to see how that ends up in the future. But one other thing, there is a person screen named Sun31 who's been playing Colony Gardens in depths for years, and I think that's the first person who put this together. So I just wanted to mention that.
Shout outs to the creator, Sun31.
I don't actually know if they're the creator, but I do know that they've been playing Colony Gardens in depths with therapy for a very, very long time. So I have a feeling they might be.
It's kind of funny how the deck plays 3 Colony Gardens and 3 Cetera Wayfinders, which is like, in a vacuum, they're like crap cards, right? But the Colony Garden does surprisingly much for the deck. It gives you an extra creature to cast a Hogaak. It protects you from edict effects to a certain degree. I don't know if 3 is the correct number, but the card has been working out for me. I almost feel ashamed to say that. But yeah, with regards to sideboard,
I think it makes sense in this deck. I think in the past I was like, I'm not seeing that because it's a tapped land to potentially help you with some edict stuff. I think there's better things to be doing that, and then the therapy interaction I don't think it's okay, but I don't think it was worth it for a tap land. But in this one, you can also cast Hogaak on it. So I think with those, now you have 3 aspects that make it, kind of worth putting into play.
And this
tap.
entire deck just makes like Liliana's Triumph look like a silly card, basically. Like, what are you going to kill? Like a plant, a Stitcher Supplier, a Satyr Wayfinder?
So, and yeah, with regards to sideboarding, something I actually happen to do quite a lot is to take out all the Hogaaks and the 4 Stitcher Supplier, especially against, for example, Storm combo decks where I felt like it was a little bit too slow. Yeah, that might be wrong because the Stitcher Supplier can also find Care Therapy, but I noticed that the sideboarding with this deck is pretty straightforward, also because the sideboard is very, very dedicated to beating certain styles of decks. Like there's 3 Mindbreak Traps, 3 Surgicals, 3 Sylvan Safekeepers, and then basically 5 removal spells between Decay and Trophy, and the one of Caracas, which I sometimes wanted in the main, but I think it's reasonable to have it in the sideboard. So yeah, I'm very high on this deck. I really like it a lot, and to me, Elfish Reclaimer, oh my god, I love that card. I wish we could make it work in regular Elves, but I mean, he's like a mercenary. He had a different kind of training, so he went out there because he wasn't really needed in the Lanova Forest. So he was like, you know what, I'm gonna team up with the Golgari, and I'm gonna get Dark Depth and put 2020s into play, which is the natural enemy of Elves. They still haven't printed Lanova with Reach, but you never know. One day we shall see one of them.
That's too much power creep, Julian. Lanova Elves would be too big of Reach.
We have fucking Grizzlebrand in the format, come on. Flying Lanova Elves, that will be the end of Legacy. I can see it. I can see it clearly.
Well, let's go on to our last topic, like relating to power creep is, I made a quick post on Twitter today basically saying I felt like Wrenn and 6 and Plague Engineer were mistakes. I think Karn and Narset, a lot of people had issues with them, but I was more okay with them because they were a little bit more expensive and they hated on combo a little bit more. Wrenn and 6 and Plague Engineer really push out a lot of fair decks. Like, they're just so strong against Thalia. They're really strong against Elves, Goblins. And, like, I just think Wrenn and 6 should have, like, 2 or 3 loyalty, so then you can... Or hold on, it has 3 loyalty, right?
It has 3.
Yeah, so I think it should start with 2 loyalty, and then I think that would be fine, because then if it ticks up, you can still lightning bolt it, and then at least you're getting a mana advantage. The way it's constructed now, there's literally no way to get an advantage against Wrenn and 6, other than something like, I don't know, like Hydroblast, like a very narrow card, because they just 2-for-1 you, and you like don't even come out ahead on mana when you kill it with like an Abrupt Decay. So I think it should have 1 fewer loyalty. I think Plague Engineer should be, first of all, it should be symmetrical. I really dislike these one-sided effects, so I really think, like, yeah, Karn and Narset, they should also be, like, symmetrical, and that would have fixed them as well. I get that they're trying to, like, push cards to be more Eternal playable, but I think it's, like, kind of sloppy design, and, like, it's just, like, not fun playing against these cards that are just, like, one-sided prison effects. And Plague Engineer, like, it shouldn't have Death Touch, it should be two-sided. I just think it's just too unfair. But it's a card that like they're never ever gonna ban. Like they're never gonna ban Plank Engineer. And I'm not saying that they should, but I'm just saying like this means going forward, tribal decks will have this to contend with. Like the first thing when you build a tribal deck is like, well, how do you beat Plague Engineer? Like, are you playing Lords? Are you doing something else to interact with it? It's just like a really tough question for decks to have to answer. So yeah, what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I tried beating Plague Engineer in many ways. One of the most interesting ones was playing Leyline of Vitality, which gives all of your creatures +0/+1, and you gain 1 life whenever you get a creature into play. Yeah, that was embarrassing. It was like I sided it in against goblins because I had nothing to bring in just to have better blocks, and oh god, it was so bad. I noticed that I had the most success with elves. I've played it quite a lot over the last 1-2 weeks. When I just went for a very traditional build, also put Progenitors into the sideboard because sometimes you can really just like get under the yeah, exactly, yeah. Or even have your 2/2 that your Nettle Sentinel or Wildwood Symbiote. That's something. You also have decays, but it's a card. It's so generic that it's really hard to fight. I think you really have to like treat it as a, well, it's not even Engineered Plague because you can't Reclamation Sage it, which is something you would otherwise be able to do. It's going to be annoying. It's going to make our life very problematic. I know that, for example, the Elves community has also done a lot of experimentation with playing more Lords now, but the problem is like these kind of decks, they are usually really good at dealing with creatures. So one thing that came up is that we wanted to play, can't remember the card right now, 4 Mana Lord, I think 2/4, so it can't be Lightning Bolted, it can't be Decayed. Gives all the creatures +1/+1. I think it even has reach. And also you gain life. I can't remember the card right now. I think maybe I'm actually going to edit it in.
Okay, so I actually looked this up, and the card I was looking for is Drinning Guildleaf Dan.
So I think you can't really commit too many resources or the way you build your deck towards trying to beat Plague Engineer, because after all, you're still only going to face it like every 3rd or 4th round if it's like a regular Legacy tournament, which is probably already quite a lot. It's making elves and tribal decks, I guess Death and Taxes also suffers quite a lot from it, quite miserable to play, but not unplayable, but it's giving me a ton of headaches right now. Mm-hmm. Eric, how do you feel about Grizzled Brand only being a 6/6 now?
Well, I think Plague Engineer is only a little bit better than Engineered Plague, but it's better enough that it's now playable in Legacy, which is, I think that's bad because that means that the decks that really suffer are these tribal decks and like fringe fun decks, you know, that now people that really like those are just going to have a lot more hard time playing them, and it doesn't really add anything to Legacy, because in the past you had Engineered Plague, which, you know, if Elves was on top this month and you were having trouble with Elves, you could put some in your sideboard, but it's not that good of a card, you know. So but now you have this card that's like, it blocks or it trades with a Tarmogoyf, or it kills a True Name Nemesis. So it's pretty good, you know? So yeah, I don't think it's that great of a card, but it's just good enough now that it's pushing out some decks that don't need to be pushed out.
It's also good with like Kolaghan's Command, like if they do answer it, somehow you bring it back. But the reason it's playable main is like it kills True Name Nemesis, and there's so many like Delver decks that are kind of relying on True Name Nemesis to juke removal, and then you just have like this Plague Engineer. So yeah, that's that card. It's just going to be in the format forever. It's going to hate on tribal decks forever, and that's just going to be Legacy from now on. So it makes me a little bit sad. I really feel like they shouldn't have printed it. But let's go on to Wrenn 6 and talk about how, like, you know, I guess we're all worried that it might just homogenize Legacy and become like, well, since you can play all the colors, like you can play 4 colors, you can play 5 colors, why would you just not do that? And then like every control deck starts to look the same. Like that's my biggest worry with the card. I will say Deathrite was legal for like 5 years, and it was only probably towards the last 2 years that it was just a little bit too much. I think Wrenn 6 should definitely not be banned now. Maybe we should have this conversation in another year and then reassess. And if it's like been the exact same thing for a year, then I think we should start considering it. So that's my position.
So how many people actually thought Deathrite Shaman might end up being banned in Legacy when it first hit the scene? I think not a lot.
Correct. Like when it first came out, well, first of all, nobody knew to play it. And then eventually people were like, oh, you play it in Jund, Elves, and Bug Delver. And then in those decks it was very good, and then people were like, wait, hold on, you just play it in 4-color Delver and Grixis Delver and Czech Pile, and then it became like too much, basically.
Yeah. It's an interesting card because in the past when we saw bans, it's usually because they did something super broken, or, I mean, Mental Misstep, I guess, is an exception because it's actually, is it the only answer ever printed that was banned? But the rest is mostly just super broken stuff, whereas Deathrite Shaman, but let's not get too deep into Deathrite Shaman. But yeah, I think there's a possibility that at some point in the future it might be banned, but we are probably like at least a year away from that. Like if it keeps dominating and maybe even more than it does right now, then I could see it, but I don't think we're anywhere close to it actually being banned or even being a contender for being banned. this is one of those cases where I really feel like the mantra of let the format figure it out by itself applies. So let's see where we're gonna be headed. Because Legacy right now overall is not horrible, right? I kind of enjoy playing it.
Agreed. There are a lot of diverse decks. Unfortunately, there's less, like, diversity isn't in, like, Maverick, Death and Texas type decks, which are, like, fairly interesting. The diversity is random gotcha decks, like Eric was trying Urza Stompy. By the way, I saw, like, an Urza Stompy deck that had 4 Narsets and 4 Echo Vions, and it also had 4 Karns and 4 Urzas. It was just wild. There's, like, it's like those kinds of decks that are more playable now, which I find very fascinating and very cool. But Wrenn and 6 is definitely pushing out the creature decks that were a little bit more interesting.
And you know what we are losing along with the creature decks? In our show notes, I actually labeled this a recurring segment because I feel like we keep going back, or at least I keep going back to this all the time. I titled it like #the war on white. Where is your Stoneforge now? Because all those 4-color decks, they're like, okay, I don't really need white, except for the one guy, that Lucky Dragon guy. And with white, Stoneforge Mystic is going away now again, because we saw some kind of resurgence of Stoneforge when Deathwatch Champion was banned, I feel. But now looking just at the numbers, we saw 4 copies in the top 25 of the SCG Open. We saw 2 decks, I guess 3 if you count Death and Taxes, in the top 32 of the previous challenge. And in the most recent challenge, we saw a single deck in the top 32 playing Stoneforge. It really feels like the card just isn't good enough to meta in the format right now. It's one of those cards that's good against, I want to say, creature decks. It's also an okay threat against most mid-range control decks. But ever since Code Against Command, that hasn't even been all that much the case anymore. I just feel like, why would you want to be playing Stoneforge right now, which used to be almost the pinnacle of the format. Like it's one of the centerpieces that the format revolved around for many years, but then maybe that was a lie. It also wasn't really that good when Miracles was the best deck in the format, so I don't know. Are you guys interested in casting Stoneforge?
No, I mean, I've never been a huge fan. I did have a very good GP finish with the card, but it's a fine card. But to your point, like when the control decks become good against it with, Swords of Plowshares, Terminus from Miracles, and then Kolaghan's Command from these Grixis piles, then there's less of a reason to play it because you're trying to go over the top with Stoneforge Mystic, but that just never works out. So that's why nobody's finding too much success with it. Maybe the metagame will shift, but what needs to happen is that there needs to be a significant number of decks that white decks are good against, however, or that these Grixis piles are bad against. So maybe something like Hogaak Thefts needs to become a much bigger part of the metagame before people start adapting back towards white.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. I wonder if that's what we're going to see in the near future, because from everything we talked about today, I feel like depth is really where you want to be going in the near future if you're not to cast Wrenn and 6. Maybe we'll actually see a Wrenn and 6 Dark Depth deck. I mean, color doesn't matter anymore, does it? So just go ahead and do that.
So I've tried very hard to beat to build a Wrenn and 6 Dark Depths deck. The mana just ends up becoming very bad / tricky. So the question is are you a Thoughtseize Dark?
Have you tried to add Astrolabe?
No, I have not. But okay, so if we're going that direction, then you're becoming more like a Jund, Loam Wrenn and 6 control deck that happens to have Dark Depths, and you're probably not playing Thoughtseizes. If you built it that way, I think the mana could work. If you're trying to play Thoughtseizes, I don't think the mana really works unless you want to have 0 basics and be super vulnerable to Blood Moon and things like that.
Yeah, maybe. And speaking of Blood Moon, is that a mistake? You sent me the lists of the most recent Legacy Challenge, and the first and second place by Yamakiller and Slay D FTW. They're the exact same version of Dragon Stompy or Moon Stompy.
So Yamakiller was actually streaming, and I believe that they were. Okay, so 2 possibilities. They were streaming, they did play the exact same list, and they split the finals, I believe. So either they were friends who knew each other, or I think they both copied a 5-0 list, and then I guess whoever created that 5-0 list had just built the perfect list. I don't think we've ever seen first and second have the exact same 75 in a Legacy Challenge before, so first time for everything.
Yamakiller popped into my stream today, and mentioned something, and it didn't sound like they were friends. It sounded like it was a coincidence that they had the exact same 75 and they did split the finals. And I did ask him just kind of in passing why he thought maybe Mono Red would perform so well this week. And he kind of just said he hadn't played Legacy in a long time and thought it looked like a reasonable strategy, something he'd done in the past. So he tried it and he made it.
I think the previous week had a ton of Rug Delver, and I think the previous week some people were playing the 4-color Snow deck, but not enough people were playing it. This week I would have expected more people on Magic Online to be playing it, but I could be wrong. Maybe the Blood Moon deck is still powerful enough to beat up on these 4-color Snow decks when like they don't have the basic lands in their hand, for instance. So I don't know. I'm curious about that matchup. Maybe it's not as bad for Moon as I thought it would be.
Well, I mean, Astrolabe costs 1, so I think Moon is going to do. You still need a Force of Will, or you're going to lose. I think, basically. Unless they mold a 4 or whatever, and I mean, if you have the Force of Will and they only have one play, then you're going to win. And if they have more than one play or they resolve the Chalice, then you're probably going to lose. Chalice and Moon, something like that.
So with that, I want to move on to 2 listener questions we received today from Pair of Slacks, who asks, would love to hear your take on Grixis control lists running a one of Nicole Bola's Dragon God in the main deck in place of Liliana the Last Hope. It's put up 2 5-0s, different pilots, he thinks, and I think it's kind of wild to me. Same list also has the new Ashiok in the sideboard, which I believe other decks are also picking up. So we already talked about Ashiok, and for you guys, I actually put a picture of Nicole Bola's Dragon God into the show notes so you can actually see what this card is doing. For the listeners, it's a 5-mana Planeswalker with 4 loyalty. It costs 3 black, a blue, and a red. It has all the loyalty abilities of all the Planeswalkers on the battlefield. For +1, you draw a card. Each opponent exiles a card from their hand or a permanent they control. -3, destroy target creature or Planeswalker. And -8, each opponent who doesn't control a legendary creature or Planeswalker loses the game. So this is probably the closest to a Planeswalker having an ultimate that literally wins the game, outside of maybe Chase, I want to say. But it's still 5 mana. So to go with my opinion first, I don't really have too much of an opinion of the card. It's the kind of thing you play when you're in a very almost inbred metagame where you know that you're not going to face a lot of quick aggressive decks like Sue, for example. And you want to have something that goes even further over the top in the mid to late game when people have maybe exhausted all their Force of Wills or don't have them available right now. So you want to land this and really just either ride it to victory. I think you might have even just won before you even get to use the ultimate. It's not something you would put into a stock list in an unknown metagame. Or at least it would be quite the gamble if you want to have that card work out. Because you also get other Planeswalkers for less than half the mana that work quite well in that kind of deck. But yeah, it's a cute thing. How do you feel about that card?
I think I'm completely underwhelmed by this card. The static ability, I mean, it's the least exciting of all the other ones we've even discussed today, and it's the most expensive Planeswalker. So I don't like the static ability. The plus doesn't, I mean, usually like Jace, you're brainstorm, so you're kind of drawing 3, kind of. You got to look at 3 cards. This one, you're drawing 1. You only look at 1. Your opponent discards a card. They might not even have a card to discard by this point in the game. It's very difficult to cast with triple black, blue, and red. The minus is it's kind of like the 6-mana Ugin. That's like, oh, this is my only removal spell. I hope this resolves because otherwise I'm dead, and then I know this is going to die, so I have a 5-mana removal spell kind of thing. So I don't know. This card doesn't excite me at all.
Bob, could you put this into your deck list?
In which deck list? The 5-color Snow deck? Dark Depths. I mean, Urborg helps cast it, right?
I guess there's an upside. So yeah, I guess none of us is really sold on the card, even though it's kind of cute, and I want to see it do something broken, but that would actually probably require for another broken Planeswalker to be in the battlefield.
I mean, if they had War of the Spark Part 2 and printed more ridiculous Planeswalkers, then people start main decking this card with like Elder Spell. But yeah, I mean, we're just going way too far down a rabbit hole at that point.
So yeah, the other question we received was on the general impact of Wrenn 6, and I think we already talked about that card a lot. So the general question is, are we making a mistake if we are playing a non-Wrenn 6 deck? And I think we kind of answered that already in the sense that I think we are not making a mistake. There's many other decks, or at least some other decks that are really good, Some of them that are even good against the Wrenn 6 kind of decks. For example, we talked about combo, and I think especially show and tell is something that people should maybe look into to beat Wrenn 6. But also the different version of the depth deck that we talked about. So I think we're still not at that point where you're actually making a mistake, where you're not playing that kind of deck. For example, I mean, the time that comes to mind is Top Miracles, where I really felt I was making a mistake every time I didn't register the deck, which I don't feel like
we're
right
nowhere
now.
close to that yet. And I'm kind of skeptical that we ever get there, because Top Miracles was just such an incredibly consistent and just way more powerful deck than every other deck in the format, and there weren't really good natural predators, whereas there are a ton of natural predators, some of which we've touched on. I also think a deck like Bomberman or Urza Stompy, that kind of strategy can also go under these decks. Basically any deck that like doesn't really care about wastelands, Wrenn 6 is almost a blank, you know?
Yeah. Good points. At this point, by the way, in speaking of Top Miracles, next week, a new Legacy series is gonna hit the scene. It's called Legacy Unchained. It's organized by Kalen Smith, also known as White Faces. And they are, actually, I joined today. We are gonna play a tournament where a lot of currently banned cards are gonna be allowed. So that's gonna be interesting. I think, Bob, you didn't have time to play in that. Eric, are you gonna be part of that?
Yeah, I'll be playing in that.
Yeah, I heard they were due Saturday, and this is something that sounds really interesting. I'm super excited to watch you guys, build these crazy decks. I think the unbanned list they chose was perfect. I don't think any card on there was like, whoa, this is way too busted. I think all of them together are approximately the same power level, and honestly, they're on the power level of certain cards that are already in the format, like Karn and Narset. I'm excited to see like what ends up coming out of this, but I ultimately decided that I didn't quite have enough time, so I decided to sit out. But my friend Cyrus made it in instead of me, so that's cool.
Yeah. So next week, the first matches are going to be streamed. It's not going to be streamed on a central channel. Instead, all the participants, or most of them, are going to stream it on their respective channels. There's not a fixed time, so people are free to schedule. But watch out, there's going to be a lot of Legacy Unchained in the next, I think it's 10 weeks that it's running. So that's going to be something super interesting. And I wonder whether Top Miracles is really just going to steamroll everyone, because it feels really strong.
I doubt it, but we'll see. I think Legacy's just gotten way more powerful. I think I guess if they unban Top today, Miracles instantly becomes good again. I don't think it would be nearly as good as it was before.
I'm pretty sure Reanimator's going to be better than everything anybody
Wait, but did
makes.
Reanimator get like any
no ban cards?
No,
I'm going to play a completely legal Reanimator deck, and I think it beats Top Miracles and everything, and all the Deathrite Shaman decks. I have to build it for the old Deathrite Shaman meta, basically.
I really hope that Survivor's gonna make a glorious comeback. Survivor of the Fittest, the best card ever banned. I just really love Survivor.
I hope it's gonna come back.
Okay, Darth Vader.
I was like, are you aware that your voice is a little scratchy there?
You don't talk like that to Vader. You think that would have worked on him in the movies? So, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up right now. I want to give some shout-outs to our new Patreon, James, who started supporting us this week, as well as our Eternal Witness supporters, Matt and Baju, and, of course, our Grizzlebrand tier supporters, Scott and Korush, who've been with us for, I think, over 3 months by now. So thank you so much for that. And also shout-outs to, I think his name was Matt, who met Bob at SEG Philadelphia. Is that true, Matt?
I'm Bob, but yes.
Oh, no,
that whole sentence was so confusing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I met one of our listeners, Matt. He showed me his Everyday Eternal stickers. They looked pretty nice. So if you are interested in that, please subscribe to our Patreon. Julian's been mentioning this a couple times, but my mic is not the best, so we're trying to chip in, get me a new mic, try to get some new stuff for the rest of the crew as well. If you like our content, we're always trying to do better. We're trying to like edit things and make things better. We looked into getting a sound editor, but Julian felt like his editing was like really good quality, so we decided to stick with that. But I think it would be nice if we could get a little bit of compensation thrown his way for his editing.
We have a routine before every podcast where I tell Bob, I can hear myself on your end. Bob, there's something wrong with your mic.
Happens every time.
Yeah. It kind of grew on me. I wish we could keep. No, actually, it would be nice if we could get you a better mic. Anyway, so if you want to support that, check out patreon.com/everydayeternal. Also hit us up on Twitter @EternalMTG. And where can people find you, Eric?
Find me on Twitch.
You still don't know your Twitch?
Well, okay, some of them are EW Landon and some of them are EW Landon1. Twitch.ewlandon and twitter.com/EW Landon1.
Nice.
And Bob, are you actually still streaming a lot?
No, I stopped streaming. So I need to buy a new laptop. So that's on my to-do list. Maybe I'll do it next weekend or something, but I'm kind of busy. But yeah, I need to buy a new laptop, and then once I have a new laptop, I might stream again.
Okay, awesome. And that time we're actually gonna also maybe get the funds for a webcam for you, so we can not only stream your forehead.
You're asking for a lot.
People want to see your face, but apparently, like, my co-hosts have this thing where they don't really want to show their face on stream. I think Eric also, you only ever show half your face, right? You want to show off your cool goat background.
Yeah, I'm working on the setup. I have a new computer coming, so things will be a little bit different once I get the new computer set up. But in the meantime, it's a little difficult for me to tilt my camera in a way and sit in a place where you can see me fully, but we're getting there.
But I'm digging the goat theme. I'm really digging the goat theme.
Oh, thank you.
So with that, guys and girls, thanks a lot for tuning in, and see you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See ya.